It was 4:01 a.m. on Tuesday, 26 August 2008, when Shropshire's Central Fire Control patched through an urgent call from the quiet hamlet of Maesbrook. Osbaston House, an ivy-draped Georgian mansion at the end of a half-mile beach-lined drive, was engulfed in flames. Sirens sliced across the sleeping countryside, but the first engine to crest the final bend slammed on its brakes. A 2-ton horse trailer lay jackknifed across the only entrance, its tires shot to shreds, its steel frame wedged between stone gateposts like a barricade. Hoses were dragged the remaining distance on foot, while precious minutes bled away. And through the hedgerow, the mansion glowed like a blast furnace, window panes bursting in rhythmic pops as fire rolled from room to room. Inside, 3 people were believed to be sleeping. Christopher Foster, 50, hailed in glossy business magazines as a self-made multimillionaire. His wife Jill, 49, celebrated locally for her warmth and impeccable taste, and their daughter Kirsty, 15, an accomplished rider whose weekends revolved around show jumping and horses. To neighbors, the Fosters seemed the definition of rural prosperity: an Aston Martin in the gravel, a string of Range Rovers for muddy school runs, clay pigeon shoots on the lawn, and even a flock of ornamental white doves that circled the lake at dusk. Osbaston was the kind of place villagers pointed out on evening walks, a fairy tale estate shimmering behind iron gates. Now those gates framed a scene from hell. As firefighters fought for access, something about the smoke smelled wrong, an industrial sting of diesel that suggested accelerant. Backup crews probed the perimeter and radioed grim findings. The stable block behind the orchard was also ablaze, and the family's kennels had fallen eerily silent. By dawn, helicopters hummed overhead, broadcasting live images of Osbaston's roof collapsing inward like a folding stage set. National breakfast shows aired side-by-side photographs. Christopher in pinstripe at a charity gala, Jill laughing beneath a straw Panama, Kirsty hugging a bay mare after winning a junior championship. Commentators struggle to reconcile those sunlit portraits with the skeletal ruins smoldering in the Shropshire fields. Detectives arrived before the last embers died and declared the site a potential crime scene. Arson specialists in silver suits picked through blackened timbers, marking anything that survived the heat. In a charred outbuilding, they found an intact hard drive from the estate's extensive CCTV system, a stroke of luck that might explain how a blaze could erupt simultaneously in 3 wings and a barn. Meanwhile, police divers dragged the estate's ornamental lake in case the family had fled and met some other fate. By early afternoon, with no bodies recovered and no sightings reported, speculation ran wild. Perhaps the Fosters had staged the catastrophe and vanished to Monaco. Perhaps a vengeful business rival had struck while they slept. Late on Wednesday, West Mercia police held a terse press conference. They confirmed that investigators regarded the fire as suspicious, that gunshots had been reported by more than one neighbor in the early hours, and that accelerant traces were present throughout the house. They also confirmed that the CCTV footage captured the family returning from a friend's barbecue at exactly 8:44 p.m. on Monday, 25 August. Christopher stepped from the driver's seat of the Range Rover, Jill carried a casserole dish, and Kirsty trailed behind scrolling on her phone. At 11:32 p.m., Jill ascended the main staircase, glass of rosé in hand. At 1 minute past midnight, the house's internet router was manually switched off, freezing Kirsty's final text exchange mid-sentence. Just after 3 a.m., a lone figure in hearing protectors crossed the courtyard carrying a rifle toward the kennels. The recording cut out at 4:11 a.m., the moment the alarm cable melted. For 3 tense days, forensic teams treated the debris like an archaeological dig, removing layers of ash with trowels and soft brushes. At last, they uncovered 2 bodies where the master bedroom had stood. Christopher and Jill, their remains intertwined beneath collapsed beams. In the ruins of the staircase, they located fragments of a 3rd body, later identified by DNA as Kirsty. Ballistics confirmed that each had been shot once to the head before the fire was set. The mansion blaze that gripped Britain became a double murder-suicide investigation, with Christopher Foster now the sole suspect. Why would a man hailed as a local business hero destroy his family and torch every symbol of success he had worked for? The answer began to emerge from solicitors' files, court dockets, and frozen bank accounts. Foster's insulation company, once valued in the tens of millions, had imploded a year earlier after he lost his patent in a bitter legal battle. Creditors were circling for more than £4 million in unpaid loans and taxes. A repossession notice taped to Osbaston's gates on the Friday before the fire warned that bailiffs would arrive after the bank holiday weekend to seize the house, the cars, even the livestock. Friends recalled Foster's offhand joke that he would leave in a body bag before letting the banks take this place. They also remembered he had recently stocked the cellar with heating oil and spent sleepless nights roaming the grounds. Yet at that Monday barbecue, he seemed relaxed, charmed the crowd, and promised Kirsty a new horse for the winter circuit. His mask of composure never slipped, not even as he hugged the host goodbye. Hours later, he would disconnect the internet, silence his dogs, shoot his family, block the gates with a trailer, flood his dream home with oil, and light the match that turned a fairy tale estate into a cautionary ruin. As dusk settled on the fourth day and smoke still drifted from Osbaston's chimneys, investigators pored over spreadsheets of overdrafts, remortgage agreements, and unpaid VAT. The picture forming was stark. For a man who lived by appearances, public bankruptcy was unthinkable. If his kingdom was doomed to fall, Christopher Foster had decided it would fall in flames, and no one he loved would be left to witness the humiliation. Smoke still curled from Osbaston's blackened chimneys when investigators turned to the question everyone was asking. Who was Christopher Foster before the fire? The answer begins in Wolverhampton, where a spirited schoolboy grew into a man obsessed with winning at all costs. Friends remembered him as charismatic, persuasive, and utterly convinced that rules were for other people. His younger brother, Andrew, later said living beside Chris felt like running a lifelong race you could never win. In 1987, Christopher married Gillian, a gentle trainee beautician whose calm presence softened his sharper edges. 6 years later, they welcomed their only child, Kirsty, a shy little girl who preferred ponies to people. Jill gave up her job to manage home and stables. Chris promised he would supply the dreams. At the time, their future looked modest, until tragedy in the North Sea presented an opportunity he could not ignore. On 6 July 1988, the Piper Alpha oil rig exploded, killing 167 men and burning for days. Television images of metal skeletons engulfed in fire seared themselves into the public mind, and into Christopher's. He noticed that existing insulation on offshore rigs failed catastrophically, so he set out to invent something better. He mortgaged the family's semi-detached house for £5,000, mixed heat-resistant chemicals in a rented unit, and christened the finished product UlvaShield. A live burn test, conducted on camera, showed his panels glowing red-hot while competitors dripped and collapsed. Overnight, oil majors queued with purchase orders, and Chris Foster became a millionaire in his early 30s. Money flowed like champagne. In 2004, Jill spotted a photograph of Osbaston House in a lifestyle magazine. 16 acres of rolling pasture, a private lake, paddocks, and a Georgian facade worthy of a period drama. The asking price topped $1 million and still required major renovation, yet Chris wired the deposit the next morning. While builders replumbed and rewired, he landscaped the grounds, imported mature trees, and dug a heated pool so his new Aston Martin would reflect in the water outside the dining room windows. He also filled the driveway with 2 Porsches, a gleaming Range Rover Convoy, and a Bond Blue DB9 whose personalized plate read simply U1VA. Inside, the couple installed Persian rugs and French armoires, then hired a live-in housekeeper and a personal assistant to manage Jill's salon appointments. Kirsty received a string of competition horses, a £250,000 indoor arena, and weekends on the Pony Club circuit. Dinner guests found monogrammed shot glasses waiting for Saturday clay pigeon marathons, each glass engraved with the Foster crest Chris had designed himself. The image was flawless, if you didn't look too closely. Those who did look noticed disquieting flashes. Chris left loaded shotguns propped beside kitchen doors. He once shot a dove that soiled his Aston's bonnet and ordered the gardener to shovel it before Jill sees. When Kirsty's black Labrador spooked a neighbor's sheep, Chris walked the dog down a bridleway and returned alone. His need for control extended beyond animals. If a supplier delivered late, he threatened to cancel contracts. If a friend voiced dissent, they simply disappeared from the guest list. Behind the bravado, cracks were forming. In 2003, Olva Lidded signed an exclusive manufacturing deal with a firm called DRC. 2 years later, lured by cheaper costs, Chris quietly struck a second agreement with another producer, an act that broke the exclusivity clause. DRC sued. By January 2007, a high court ruling stripped Foster of the Olva Shield patent and saddled the company with enormous damages. Within months, Olva slid into liquidation. £3 million in assets were frozen. Salary payments stopped. Yet the spending at Osbaston accelerated. To keep the illusion afloat, Chris remortgaged the mansion 3 times, juggled more than 20 overdrafts, and withheld VAT, national insurance, and corporation tax payments. His accountant resigned and reported him to the Inland Revenue. Banks began rejecting card transactions. Bailiffs left calling cards at the gates. Still, invitations to pheasant shoots went out on embossed stationery, and Jill continued weekly shopping trips where she rarely glanced at price tags. By summer 2008, the tide could no longer be held back. Foster's personal debt had ballooned past £4 million. On Friday, 22nd August, a repossession notice appeared on the wrought iron gates. Enforcement agents would return after the bank holiday to seize the property and everything in it. The housekeeper recalled showing Chris the letter. He studied it in silence, folded it twice, and placed it inside his jacket pocket. That weekend, he bought 200 liters of domestic heating oil and, according to internet history logs later recovered, spent hours reading self-harm forums and searching phrases like fastest house fire accelerant. Close friends sensed turbulence. One texted, "How are you holding up?" Christopher replied, "Not good. Things are coming to a head for me soon." When pressed, he switched topic to an upcoming barbecue and clay shoot scheduled for Monday night. He insisted all 3 Fosters would attend. Photos from that gathering survive. Jill in a floral dress, Kirsty giggling with a paper plate balanced on her lap, Chris raising a glass as dusk settled over the lawn. Nobody present guessed that his mind was ticking through a brutal itinerary. He had already disabled select CCTV cameras, laid out his firearms, and prepared fuel lines from the oil tank to the cellar. The family left the party at 8:30 p.m. and drove through Osbaston's gates for what appeared to be an ordinary night. Jill headed upstairs at 11:30 to set the alarm. Kirsty texted a school friend that she was knackered but happy before her signal vanished at 1 minute past midnight. Downstairs, Christopher Foster began the quiet, methodical steps that would end a dynasty before dawn. Monday, 25th August 2008, ended the way countless cozy summer nights do. Leftover barbecue dishes stacked in the sink, a teenager yawning over late-night texts, and a mother clicking off lights on her way upstairs. At Osbaston House, the clock above the kitchen aga showed 11:32 p.m. when Jill Foster set the alarm panel and began her ritual of locking French doors. Christopher kissed her cheek, claimed he would finish up outside, and watched her climb the wide oak staircase that curved to the master suite. She did not know he had removed 3 CCTV cameras from their housings earlier that day. Down the corridor, 15-year-old Kirsty lay on her stomach, messaging a friend about riding plans for the weekend. At 12:01 a.m., her phone abruptly lost signal. The internet router in the study had been switched off at the wall, severing Wi-Fi and freezing her conversation mid-sentence. She rolled over, grumbled at the dead connection, and fell asleep beneath posters of show-jumping idols and glossy Pony Club rosettes. Christopher Foster moved with chilling efficiency. In the ground floor gunroom, he selected a .22 rifle, fitted with a sound suppressor and a high-powered lamp. He pocketed additional ammunition, crossed the marble foyer, and padded upstairs on thick carpet. Jill was already asleep, breathing in the half-dark. One muffled shot to the back of her head ended 30-plus years of shared life. The suppressor reduced the report to the snap of a book dropped flat. A minute later, Kirsty met the same fate, still beneath her duvet, headphones trailing from a silent iPod. The house was now silent, but for the low whir of security drives recording. Christopher descended, traded the .22 for a 12-bore shotgun, and strode into the night. 4 family dogs, 2 Labradors, a Spaniel, and a Terrier, barked in recognition when he reached the stone-built kennels. Each bark ended in a single echo that drifted across the lawn. He reloaded, crossed the yard to the stable block, and entered the barn where Kirsty's treasured horses stamped nervously at the unfamiliar scent of gun oil. 6 detonations, hollow in the timber rafters, silenced hooves that had once carried county trophies. With the animals dead, Foster reached for the fuel. A garden hose, already coupled to the domestic oil tank, snaked through a cellar window. He opened the valve until heating oil gurgled down the line. He pulled a second hose across the gravel to the garage and doused the Aston Martin, 2 Porsches, and a Range Rover whose personalized plates gleamed in the moonlight. Diesel pooled beneath tires like black mercury. At 3:35 a.m., he climbed into the estate's horse trailer, reversed it through the main gates, and slewed it sideways until its axles wedged between brick pillars. He stepped out, aimed the shotgun at each tire, and fired, ensuring the trailer could not be moved. The only access for emergency vehicles was now blocked by 2 tons of dead weight and 4 rims of shredded rubber. Back at the house, he lit a rag soaked in white spirit, tossed it through the cellar hatch, and watched flames run oily fingers along the hose. The fire raced upward, feeding on curtains, parquet flooring, and 20,000 pounds worth of antique mahogany. Heat shattered windows in gunshot cracks. Oxygen rushed in, turning the foyer into a blast furnace. Christopher returned to the master bedroom, lay beside Jill's body, and wrapped an arm across her shoulder as if settling in for sleep. Autopsy evidence would later show no bullet wounds on him, only soot in his lungs. Whatever fear or regret surfaced in that final minute, he met it face up while his creation roared around him. At 4:11 a.m., the house's security system failed. The final CCTV frame captured a corridor swallowed in flame. Moments later, a neighbor half a mile away woke to an orange glow pulsing behind treetops and dialed 999. Shropshire's firefighters were on the road within minutes, blue strobes strobing across hedgerows, until the convoy met the crippled horse trailer. Crew members vaulted stone walls with hoses, but the delay cost them. By the time water reached the eaves, Osbaston's slate roof was sagging inward like burnt paper. Diesel-fed flames leapt from bedroom windows and licked the clock tower. Paint blistered from the Aston's bonnet with audible pops. Tires burst and spun on rims before sagging into puddles of molten rubber. In the stable yard, fire danced beneath rafters, igniting straw bales stacked for winter feed. Columns of smoke rose and twisted into the clear night sky, visible 15 miles away on the outskirts of Shrewsbury. Police arrived as the sun cracked the horizon, pink light mingling with acrid haze. They found spent shotgun shells at the gate, 4 canine bodies in the kennel yard, and hoofprints scarred into mud that steamed from the barn's collapse. By mid-morning, arson investigators traced the hose back to the oil tank and confirmed careful planning, not spontaneous rage. The scene told a single horrific story. Christopher Foster had transformed his life's grandest symbol into a funeral pyre, ensuring no creditor, no bailiff, not even curious strangers, could ever inhabit the world he built. Journalists descended on Maesbrook, broadcasting live against the skeletal remains of Georgian Brick. The narrative of a self-made millionaire consumed by secret debt began to eclipse the smoldering image on screen. While firefighters damped hotspots, detectives commandeered the village hall, reviewing burned notebooks, court summonses, and seizure orders that explained the financial vice closing in on Foster during his final days. By evening, the once immovable horse trailer was winched free, revealing bullet-riddled tires and a smear of diesel on cobblestones. A firefighter brushed ash from a brass nameplate that read Osbaston House in elegant script, now scorched, warped, and as hollow as the myth it had advertised. Daybreak on Friday found Osbaston House a silent, skeletal ruin, but now the real excavation began. Crime scene tents dotted the blackened lawn. With every shovelful of ash, forensic officers mapped a timeline that would dismantle Christopher Foster's carefully staged illusion. They worked from the outer ring inward. First came the kennels, 4 canine corpses, each with a close-range shotgun wound. Plastic wadding still clung to singed fur, a grim confirmation of intent. Next, the stable block. 6 horses lay where they had dropped, their water buckets kicked over in panic. Brass shotgun shells glittered beneath charred rafters. Farther on, the twisted frame of the horse trailer revealed something new. 2 of the flattened tires bore neat, caliper-consistent entry holes. The trailer hadn't blown during the fire. It had been executed before the blaze began. Inside the mansion, the temperature had fallen enough for pathologists to recover human remains. What had been the master suite was now a rubble pit that smelt of wet plaster and diesel. Beneath collapsed beams lay two bodies entwined. Jill Foster's skull carried a clean entrance wound behind the right ear. Christopher's skeleton showed no ballistic trauma, only carbon in his airways. 20 meters away, scattered amid a heap of bricks that was once the main staircase, officers uncovered fragments of a teenage skeleton. DNA swabs matched Kirsty. The positioning suggested she had been shot in bed, her bones tumbling when the upper floors pancaked into the hall. With the bodies came the paperwork. The coroner's preliminary findings shocked no one in the incident room, yet reading them felt like touching ice. Jill and Kirsty died instantly from gunshot trauma. Christopher inhaled lethal levels of smoke and carbon monoxide. Heat fused sections of his clothing to Jill's nightdress where he had wrapped himself around her. A psychiatrist on call that evening muttered, "Protective embrace or ownership gesture? Hard to tell with someone like Foster." CCTV technicians, working in a mobile van, extracted the mansion's last functioning camera files. Footage confirmed the family's return at 8:44 p.m. Jill's good-natured wave to the infrared lens, Kirsty's sleepy half-smile. Midnight showed Christopher disconnecting an Ethernet cable in the study. At 3:07 a.m., the same lens caught him hauling an oil-soaked hose toward the cellar hatch. 32 minutes later, he strode past again carrying a pump-action shotgun, glassy-eyed, sweat gleaming under the porch light. There was no footage after 4:11 a.m. Flames consumed the network hub seconds later. While one team rebuilt the final hours frame by frame, another traced Foster's finances. Court ledgers revealed a roaring bonfire of debt. More than £4 million owed to banks, suppliers, and the Inland Revenue. 21 overdrawn accounts. Osbaston mortgaged 3 times in 5 years. The once lauded Ulva Shield patent had been stripped from him after a high court breach of contract ruling. Liquidators valued his remaining business assets at pennies on the pound. And then came the letter, still legible although heat-crisped, the repossession notice taped to the gates 4 days before the fire. It listed the precise date enforcement agents would arrive, Tuesday, 26 August 2008. Foster set the fires only hours earlier. Detectives interviewed the housekeeper, who spoke of Foster staring at that notice in dumb shock before slipping it into his blazer. They questioned the gardener, who remembered 50-gallon drums delivered 2 weeks prior under the guise of pesticide. They spoke with friends from the barbecue. Chris cheerful, Jill radiant, Kirsty teasing her father about his clay pigeon score. Nothing to betray the storm he was guiding them toward. Across the Midlands, front pages ran competing headlines. Millionaire's debt horror, family annihilation, or final act of love. Everyone sought motive, few agreed. On Sunday, Christopher's mother, Enid, gave a tearful doorstep interview. She repeated that her eldest son was kind and must have acted to spare Jill and Kirsty from disgrace. Her younger son, Andrew, filed past reporters without comment, but journalists uncovered letters that painted darker memories. In one, dated 1999, Andrew had tried to reconcile after years of estrangement. Christopher replied demanding an abject written apology and promising that only then might Andrew be permitted back into the fold. Childhood friends described Chris as magnetic yet manipulative, the boy who bent playground rules, the teenager who hotwired a neighbor's motorbike for a thrill, the adult who weaponized charm when money failed. The inquest opened in Shrewsbury 6 months later. Pathologists presented ballistic trajectories. Fire engineers mapped accelerant pathways. Financial auditors detailed the implosion of OVA Limited. One expert testified that Foster pumped roughly 200 liters of heating oil into the cellar. Enough, he said, to guarantee structural collapse before the fire brigade could lay hose. The coroner asked the jury to consider 2 questions. Had Christopher Foster unlawfully killed his wife and daughter? And had he then taken his own life? No juror hesitated. Unanimous verdicts returned within 90 minutes. Unlawful killings and suicide. If the legal outcome felt swift, the moral reckoning lingered. Comment pages filled with dueling narratives. Some echoed Enid's belief Foster acted from twisted love, refusing to watch Jill and Kirsty sink into poverty under the tabloid glare. Others argued control was his true religion, and death the final act of ownership. A criminologist on breakfast television distilled it into one sentence. For narcissists facing public disgrace, obliteration can appear more attractive than surrender. Funeral arrangements deepened the divide. Jill and Kirsty were interred together in St. John's Churchyard, their coffins borne by Pony Club friends and relatives. Christopher was buried privately, miles away, his graveside attended only by Enid and a single family friend. Reporters noted there was no headstone on his plot, just bare turf and a numbered marker. Meanwhile, the shell of Osbaston stood cordoned for years, visited by sightseers who photographed warped door frames and the skeletal orangery. Developers whispered about luxury flats. Historians lobbied to preserve the ruin as a memorial. Nothing moved until 2011 when contractors raised the remains. Even then, locals claimed dawn mist sometimes caught in the tree line, glowing the same malevolent orange that had woken them on that August morning. Yet the estate's curse was not finished. In 2014, a businessman bought the cleared plot for a bargain £400,000 and built a glass and stone residence intended as a fresh start. By 2019, he was suing the builder, calling the house a death trap riddled with structural faults, 60-kilogram stones sliding from walls, live wires sparking behind cladding. It's like this place won't let anyone live in peace, he told a local paper. Osbaston, it seemed, still carried the echo of a man who believed if he couldn't keep paradise, no one should. For months after the inquest, Christopher Foster's face flickered across British television screens, a rictus smile frozen from an old corporate video, while pundits tried to pin a single word to his motives: greed, pride, madness, despair. Behind the studio lights, forensic psychiatrists compiled a far more complex portrait, one that placed Foster among a grim fraternity known as family annihilators, men who, when status or control slips away, turn their homes into killing fields. Investigators sent Foster's medical files to Dr. Paul Keedwell, a consultant psychiatrist who studies catastrophic thinking. The GP notes showed a man who, in the 18 months before the fire, complained of insomnia, racing thoughts, and severe low mood linked to financial stress. He had accepted an antidepressant prescription but never collected repeat refills. In session, he admitted fleeting suicidal images, yet felt responsible for shielding his family from consequences of his debts. Dr. Keedwell's post-mortem report described a classic collision of two forces: narcissistic entitlement, the conviction that his carefully curated image must be preserved at all costs, and catastrophic shame when that image cracked. When reality threatened to expose the lie, annihilation became, in his distorted calculus, a form of damage limitation. Criminologists at Birmingham City University mapped the Osbaston timeline onto their typology of family annihilators. Foster fit the anomic narcissistic subtype: success and identity weld to wealth. The moment the balance sheet collapses, life loses meaning, and the perpetrator cannot envision his family adapting without him. They compared him to John List, the American accountant who murdered his family in 1971 after losing his job, and to William Perry, the Cheshire solicitor who killed his wife and daughter in 2010 when credit card lies unraveled. Each man set the stage, eliminated pets, sabotaged escape routes, and left no survivor able to contradict the narrative. Yet there were differences. Unlike List, Foster offered no written confession. Unlike Perry, he spared his own mother. Detective Chief Inspector Mick Jeffs, the SIO on the case, told a crime conference audience that these deviations signaled not mercy, but theater. Foster, he argued, crafted the crime scene as a final statement: the luxury cars burnt, the lake reflecting flames, the trailer pinning first responders outside the iron gates. It was as though he wanted the world to see his empire collapse, and to know he, not a bank manager, pushed the button. Media coverage helped shape that spectacle. Tabloids zoomed in on charred chandeliers and melted Louboutin heels, inviting readers to ogle the ruins of privilege. Broadsheets debated whether the tax system should have intervened sooner. Lifestyle magazines printed sidebars on warning signs of financial strain behind gated drives. But victims' charities accused broadcasters of glamorizing the tragedy, replaying drone footage of the mansion like a Gothic backdrop while glossing over Jill's community volunteer work or Kirsty's gentle friendships at school. Inside that school, counselors faced a subtler fallout. Kirsty's classmates reported nightmares about fathers losing jobs and doing a Chris Foster. Riding instructors at the local equestrian center set up quiet memorial corners in the tack room, where Rosacks faded beside tea light candles. One girl left a note, "I promise I'll talk if I ever feel trapped." Child psychologists later said the public nature of the crime forced teenagers to confront adult themes, debt, reputation, mortality, long before they were ready. Financial regulation watchdogs, too, examined their role. How had Foster sustained a 21-account overdraft carousel without triggering coordinated alerts? A Treasury subcommittee heard evidence that siloed banking systems let high-value clients juggle loans until collapse. By 2010, UK lenders rolled out improved cross-bank risk dashboards, partly inspired by the Osbaston report. The measure arrived too late for Jill and Kirsty, but advocates argued it might prevent copycat implosions. Not everyone believed regulation could touch the deeper motive. Professor Liz Yardley, co-author of a seminal study on family annihilators, wrote that these crimes are less about pounds and pence than about the story a perpetrator tells himself. For Foster, the story was one of self-made supremacy. When reality contradicted it, the contradiction itself became intolerable. Destroying the family spared him, briefly, from witnessing their social descent, and spared them, in his warped view, from living as ordinary. Yardley cautioned that such logic is inaccessible to outsiders precisely because it hinges on an inward collapse of identity, not on rational cost-benefit. The debate bled into popular culture. A best-selling true crime book reframed the case as The Millionaire and the Mirror, arguing Foster's true love affair was with his own reflection. A documentary crew reconstructed the estate using CGI, overlaying heat maps of flame spread to show viewers where each life ended. Survivors' advocates pushed back, reminding producers that Jill's elderly parents still lived in Shropshire and dreaded supermarket checkout queues where magazine covers displayed their daughter's final moments. Amid the noise, one quiet initiative took root, a charity called Ambergate, founded by a banker who had counseled distressed clients and feared another Osbaston. They offered confidential debt crisis hotlines for high-income professionals, emphasizing that shame need not escalate to violence. In its first 5 years, Ambergate fielded over 10,000 calls. Solicitors, surgeons, property developers who admitted they had contemplated taking everyone with me. Counselors credited the Foster fire as a cautionary lodestar. Callers needed only to whisper Osbaston, and volunteers understood the precipice they confronted. As for the estate itself, new owner Kevin Gorski's structural lawsuit dragged through high court filings. Engineers blamed shifting foundations, flawed stone cladding, even legacy subsurface heat damage from 2008. Locals joked the land was cursed, but surveyors' logs showed more prosaic causes: cut-price concrete and corner-cutting masons. Still, when a 60-kilogram keystone crashed into Gorski's patio during a mild breeze, villagers muttered that Christopher Foster's ghost disapproved of anyone else calling Osbaston home. 15 years on, the Foster case appears in policing handbooks under extreme reputational stressors. Detective trainees study the timeline: the repossession letter on Friday, the barbecue on Monday, the fire in the early hours of Tuesday. 3 days in which a collapsing facade hardened into a death sentence. Psychological first aid teams now deploy faster when financial ruin intersects with gun ownership and controlling temperaments, a protocol shaped in part by that Shropshire dawn. 15 summers have passed since orange light turned Macebrook's night sky into a warning flare, yet the Foster fire refuses to cool in Britain's collective memory. Every August, local papers still run on this day retrospectives. Every few years, a new podcast revisits Osbaston House, layering fresh interviews onto a narrative already heavy with tragedy. Some of the sharpest echoes live in small details, like the bronze nameplate from the ruined gates, now exhibited at the Shropshire Fire Museum, its lettering warped by heat but still readable: Osbaston House. Visitors linger over the plaque, imagining the manicured driveway that once lay beyond, and the choices that turned paradise into kindling. Christopher's brother, Andrew, eventually agreed to a single television interview. He sat beneath studio lights, clutching an old photograph of 2 boys on bicycles. His voice faltered when he described learning that the younger cyclist, Kirsty, never even had a chance to grow into her second act. Asked whether he forgave Christopher, Andrew said the word felt irrelevant. Forgiveness implies someone made a mistake, he murmured. Chris executed a plan. The interviewer offered silence. The camera zoomed on fingers trembling around a faded Polaroid. Enid Foster, who had insisted her son acted to protect his family, died quietly in 2016 at the age of 87. She left a handwritten note instructing that no floral tributes bear Christopher's name. At her funeral, Andrew read Psalm 34, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted." Then, breaking protocol, placed 3 white roses beside her coffin, one for his mother, one for Jill, and one for Kirsty. Outside the chapel, reporters kept a respectful distance. There were no questions left to ask that grief could answer. Meanwhile, Kevin Gorski's lawsuit over the new Osbaston residence crawled through civil court. Engineers blamed missing wall ties and substandard mortar. Insurers argued latent heat damage from 2008 compromised the soil. In 2023, the High Court allocated partial liability to the builder, partial to the architect, and none to the land itself. Still, locals trade gallows humor. The house doesn't want anyone else living there, as though Christopher's final claim of ownership lingers in the foundations. Over time, the Foster story seeped into professional training materials far beyond Shropshire. Police family liaison officers study it to understand the psychological whiplash neighbors experience when the man next door becomes the villain of a headline. Insolvency practitioners cite Osbaston when urging banks to recognize red flag borrowing patterns. Even equestrian safety courses reference Kirsty's case, reminding instructors to maintain open lines of communication with teens whose parents control every aspect of their lives. The ripple effects, policy tweaks, hotlines, lectures, cannot resurrect 3 lives, but they mark society's attempt to harvest meaning from ruin. In Macebrook itself, memory takes quieter forms. Each Christmas, a wreath appears on the church gate, 2 white lilies entwined with a navy ribbon, unsigned but understood to be from Jill's best friend, who still refuses interviews. The local pony club keeps a silver cup engraved KF. Winners are reminded that the initials belong to a girl who once cleared fences with effortless grace. And at the annual village fete, stallholders leave an empty trestle table unclaimed. A decade and a half ago, the Foster family sold raffle tickets there, smiling for photos no one can look at the same way again. Psychologists caution that wrestling motive from a dead man's silence tempts oversimplification. Was Christopher Foster driven by a twisted instinct to shield his loved ones from public humiliation? Or did he simply refuse to live without the applause wealth commanded? Evidence supports both readings. The father who emailed a friend, "I can't bear them suffering," and the businessman who fired off a furious letter demanding his brother beg and scrape for acceptance. Perhaps the 2 motives intertwine. Pride camouflaged as protection, possession masked as mercy. What remains unambiguous is outcome. 3 human beings, 16 animals, and every memento of a family history reduced to ash to prevent the world from witnessing defeat. If there is a single lesson threading through the ash, experts say, it is the lethal potential of all or nothing stories. When identity hangs on a single pillar, money, status, reputation, the moment that pillar cracks, catastrophe can feel like escape. That insight fuels modern support networks, debt crisis helplines, confidential therapy for high-income professionals, workshops that teach children the difference between what we have and who we are. None guarantee prevention, yet each chips at the silence where shame thrives. And what of the wider public, still drawn to true crime retellings? Ethicists argue audiences must hold 2 thoughts at once. Witnessing horror can foster empathy and vigilance, but retelling must not tip into voyeurism. The families of victims, they remind us, endure anniversaries that coincide with documentary premieres. Responsible storytelling, they say, keeps its lens not on spectacle, but on human cost and on the choices that might avert the next tragedy hiding behind manicured hedges. If you've stayed with this story from the first blue flash of fire engines to the lingering questions 15 years later, ask yourself, in Christopher Foster's final calculus, was he a desperate protector or a narcissist who could not imagine life without applause? Let me know your verdict. Type protector or narcissist in the comments and tell us why. If this series sharpened your sense of how fragile facades can be, tap the like button so more true crime seekers find it. And if you want deep dive cases where money, ego, and morality collide every single week, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Next Monday, we'll unravel the unsolved disappearance linked to a billion-dollar property empire. Thank you for watching, for thinking critically, and for remembering 3 lives eclipsed by one man's fatal need for perfection. Until our next case, stay curious, stay compassionate, and stay safe.